All right, coaches, this is one of those episodes where I'd recommend grabbing a pen because Dr. Stephanie Estima is about to drop some real deal insights that every health coach needs in their toolbox, especially if you work with women. I learned at least 10 new things in this conversation that I did not know before. It is an incredibly awesome conversation. My guest today is Dr. Stephanie Estima. She's a total powerhouse in the world of women's health, metabolism, and the brain-body optimization. She's a doctor of chiropractic with a deep background in functional neurology, metabolism, and female physiology. But what really sets her apart is how she weaves it all into a framework that actually works with the female nervous system and not against it. She's the creator of the Estima Method, the author of The Betty Body, and the host of Better with Dr. Stephanie, a chart-topping podcast with over 5 million downloads and counting. Her mission is to help women live stronger, smarter, more hormonally aligned, and on their terms. And if that's the kind of client you work with, then this episode is for you. Please enjoy. Hi, I'm Erin Power. I'm a health coach, a health coaching educator and mentor, and your host of Health Coach Radio. This podcast delves into the art, science, and business of health coaching. Whether you're aspiring to land a coaching dream job or to embark on your own entrepreneurial adventure, we cover it all. Our mission is to help you grow your career, elevate your income, change the lives of the clients who need your help, and leave a lasting mark in this rapidly growing field. It's time for health coaches to make an impact. It's time for Health Coach Radio. Hey, Dr. Stephanie Estima, I'm grateful to have you here. How are you doing today?
I am great, and I am delighted to be here.
I am too. I listen to your podcast a lot, and so it's really, your voice is very soothing to me, and I just take your voice to me, you're a voice of knowledge. Honestly, this is how I interpret, vocally you. But I mean, you are a titan of the wellness world, especially for women. And I do want to talk about women's wellness to a certain extent in this conversation because a lot of health and wellness coaches are zeroing in on that, rightfully so. And I know this is a question that gets asked all the time when you're on a podcast, but I would love for you to just sort of fill us in on, like, taking us back. How did this all start for you, creating this powerful personal brand of yours in the wellness space?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I am a doctor of chiropractic by training, and I spent 19 years in private practice in Toronto, Canada, seeing patients from in the downtown core, which is where my clinic was. People would travel from sort of the surrounding geographic areas. In the clinic, it was never just, and I say just, physical rehabilitation. Like, certainly we had a lot of people who would come in for back pain and neck pain and headaches and things like that. But part of their care plan was always nutrition. It was always fitness. It was always recovery and stress. So that has always been part of my philosophical premise in terms of what creating health looks like. So for all the health coaches that are listening, that salutogenic philosophy. So how can we be health promoting rather than just treating disease? And so I did that for, like I said, it was in private practice for 19 years, and then started I was like, oh, this online thing, let me just try this little nutrition program, and it just blew up. And I had also been, when you're in practice for you're a clinician for a long period of time, like, loved my patients. It was like the clinic was successful. It was like easy, I was on like cruise control, but still felt like I wasn't impacting enough people. And as we were running nutrition programs online as well as in-house as well, I was noticing that there were differences in terms of like female results, right? So like it was very stark contrast. Like men and women would come in and do a nutrition program, and the husband would be like, "Doc, this is amazing. I've lost 20 pounds." We'd run their labs, like testosterone's like through the roof. And then the woman was like, we're doing the same thing. And I have lost 1 pound and I feel like I can't sleep anymore. So really noticed early on in physical practice and then in the online iteration of it that women and men had different outcomes. So started playing with that. And then it's just evolved into me really feeling like I know that there are a lot of people now who are focusing on women's wellness, and it's wonderful to see, and I'm thrilled to see it. I think more people still need to be beating that drum because women are absolutely not small men. We are not, smaller archetypes of men with just pesky hormones. So I think that it's just really evolved over time. Like my audience, my first book was all about menstrual cycle literacy, like how to understand your hormones through the menstrual cycle, how to change nutrition and fitness and recovery. And now I'm in perimenopause myself. I'm 47. My audience is also in perimenopause and menopause. So, my interests are sort of evolving with my community. And so now I'm very focused in on some of the physiological, mental, emotional, socioeconomic changes that happen in perimenopause, and currently writing a book on it as well.
Oh, are you? Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
When's that coming out?
My manuscript is due at the end of this year. So it is going to be out we actually haven't decided yet. So it's either going to be December 26 or January 27.
Amazing. Wow. Exciting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested in a lot of the stuff you touched on there. So first of all, while seeing patients in clinic, it dawned on you, as it should, I guess, men and women seem to respond differently to things. Yeah, I work with women as well in my private practice health coaching, and that's what they always say. My husband can stop thinking about Pepsi and he drops 10 pounds.
Right, exactly.
What kinds? I mean, you kind of touched on it at the end there. There's the hormonal aspect. One of the things that I think about a lot is the psychosocial aspect. Okay, because I'm also in perimenopause, so yay, solidarity. Yay, Gen X women. We're tackling it. Right? Like who better to tackle it than Gen X, honestly?
Absolutely, yep. Mm-hmm.
But the psychosocial aspect, I've been thinking about this long and hard. I'd love to get your take on it. We came up with, through the sort of processed food latchkey kid era. So I personally had to feed myself dinner, and it was like hot dogs and mac and cheese. Then through the 90s and 2000s, which is the skinny obsessed culture, dieting and cardio and salads.
Cosmo diets, right? Mm-hmm. It was like the Cosmo diet to get a hotter man, eat 4 grapes and okay.
I know. By the way, it's so triggering to me that cottage cheese made a comeback, because it's like I still have trauma from cottage cheese era of the 80s. But anyway, it's fine. But the psychosocial piece, women, so now we're getting this narrative, okay, now I have to strength training, eat a ton of protein, and it's such a mismatch from our programming. Yeah. What do you think about that? Like, how do you reconcile that with your clients or your patients? Are you finding that they're open to it, or are you getting some pushback for them as well?
I think it's a mixed bag. To your point, we all grew up in the cardio section of the gym. Like, the way that I actually paid for my professional schooling was I was a step instructor. Hey. So I was like step instructor. I was teaching high-low and Taibo. If you remember, if anyone who's of that generation remembers, like Taibo was the big thing, like that kickboxing kind of class. So we all sort of grew up, it's like more cardio, more cardio, more cardio, more cardio. And so now to tell these women who've grown up on the treadmill, like, hey, actually, you should be lifting some iron. Like, you should be pumping iron. I think for some women, it can be difficult because there are myths that continue to perseverate, right? So it's this idea of like, oh, I don't want to get bulky. I just want to be toned. Or, the other, I would say more legitimate concern is injury. So if you don't have like a really good sort of a mind, a motor patterning that's really solidified and good technique, your tendons and your ligaments and your muscles, you are certainly more susceptible to injury when you're 40 and 50 than when you were when you were 20 and 30, and the bounce back is not as quick. So I do think that there is some hesitancy around it, and this is why I like to talk about technique, manipulating tempo as a way to actually progressively overload. Like, it doesn't, I know that there's lots, like there's t-shirts that say like lift heavy, swear word, right? Like lift heavy stuff, which is great. But there are also other ways that you can grow muscle that don't actually involve always increasing the weight. Like, you can manipulate sets, you can manipulate reps, you can manipulate tempo. Like, there's all these different ways in the gym to do that. So, long way of saying, yes, I do encounter that probably as often as you do. And once we can get women around this idea that you're not going to get even if if you play soccer one afternoon with your kids, trust me, you're not going to be Cristiano Ronaldo. Like, you're not just going to accidentally fall. It's like, just because you drive your car to the grocery store, you're not an F1, like you're not a NASCAR driver, so it really, it's very, very difficult just from a hormonal composition perspective for women to become a quote unquote bulky. Mm-hmm. I would actually, maybe this is going down a bit of a separate rabbit hole, but I would actually push back on that idea of like, what's so bad about being bulky?
I know.
What's the definition of bulky anyway? You know what it is? Taking up space. So why are we so afraid to take up space? Right? So there's like another little like, oh, you're afraid of being bulky? Why? What's wrong with that?
100%.
If you were bulky, if you had like slightly bigger quads, like what's going to happen? Actually, I'll tell you something that actually happened this morning. I was training my back, my AirPods in, whatever. I had this older gentleman come up to me. It's like the best compliment you can ever give a woman who loves to lift weights. He was like, you know what? It's so unfortunate that you're training your back. And I said, I'm sorry. It's like, I had to finish my son, like, pardon? He's like, because you can't see it. And I am standing behind you and I can literally see every single muscle rippling I was doing like a single arm lat pull down.
Amazing.
And he's like, you just have to see your back. Can I take your phone and videotape your back for you?
Oh,
He's
wow.
like 75, like he's such a lovely old man. I was like, of course you can, And he's like, I just want you to know that it looks incredible. And it's like it's such a compliment. I mean, for a woman who all I want is to get jacked and bulky, it's like that is such a wonderful compliment. So I would actually challenge any woman who's listening, whether you're a health coach or you just love this podcast and you're like, I want to learn how to live better and optimize my health. There's nothing. Even if you wanted to, it's like 98% of the female population cannot get bulky without exogenous help. But even if you're in the 2% that did, like, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with taking up space and having a little bit more muscle? Like, do you know how gorgeous muscle looks on a woman?
Mm-hmm.
So
this is actually
those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about, the psychosocial piece. So because it's, what if you were more substantial, right? What if you were strong? Why is that not okay? So asking those kinds of questions, I think this is really in the purview of the health coach. We have a sort of limited scope of practice, and we're not meant to be dealing with people's blood tests and diagnoses. That's not our realm. But the way they feel about things, the way they perceive and sort of advocate for themselves is in our purview. So I want to share my perspective with you. You just made me think of this. I like to encourage women to eat robust meals. This is one of my sort of brand things. I'm not going to get into it, but it's like, we do a lot of yogurt and protein bars and little snacky type meals that I think are a holdover from our dieting programming. And I try to get my clients to eat robust actual meals all the way to satiety. It's just one of the things I try to get them to do because I'm trying to get them to repair their relationship with food and what have you, appetite. And they're so worried about eating a robust meal because it's not ladylike. I'm not supposed to eat a meal that's the same size as my husband's meal. And I say to them, why not? Why not? Why? Robust nourishment is one of the most feminine energies I can think of. You're a reproductive powerhouse, or you were. Maybe not anymore, but you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so robustly nourishing yourself, being robustly strong, like to me, the more I think of it, this is feminine energy. Feminine energy is strong and round and robust, I think.
And wanting more.
Yeah.
And always wanting more. I think that's also like that insatiable desire for more, I think is also part of that feminine energy as well. Yeah.
Okay, now we're into the weeds because I believe that women, especially these Gen X women that are now the era coming through the menopause transition, we are generally unsatiated, if in matter of speaking. We didn't get what we wanted in our careers, whatever. We've never eaten proper meals. We've been dieting since we were 15 years old. We're generally unsatiated. And I want to return, like, this appetite, this satiety, generally speaking, is really the feminine energy I want to help women sort of recreate and reconnect. Because I think about the menopause transition. Well, we are out of our reproductive era. Fair enough. But a reproductive woman is one of the most resilient things in the universe, really. We have to be. And we come through that. That's who we were. That's who we are. So anyway, there's a robustness and a resiliency that I think is the pure expression of feminine energy. It's just that it hasn't been well practiced. We've been really practiced on the shrinking, starving, hiding away.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this maybe shift from being as skinny as possible to being as strong as possible. It's like strong over skinny. And when you're looking at your diet, instead of framing it like, what are all the things I need to exclude, maybe to be in a caloric deficit or to stay slim or whatever, looking at your plate or the food available to you and saying, what are the things I absolutely need to include in order to survive? I think that there's it's subtle, like I'm almost saying the same thing, but I think that perspective is a very healthy one. So rather than, I can only have 10 grapes or whatever, what do I need to include? Maybe I need to include grapes and almonds and maybe some cottage cheese, maybe not. But, what is it that I need to include in this snack or in this meal that is going to make me thrive? And certainly when we're talking about this in the context of muscle hypertrophy, which is just fancy talk for like growing muscle, your muscle, can you build muscle in a caloric deficit? Yes. You can technically. However, is it much easier for you to build when you're giving your muscle actually substrate, when you're giving your muscle the building blocks? We don't eat protein just because we want to eat protein. We will eat protein for the amino acids, right? So what do we have to make sure that we're including so that we are getting that all of our amino acid requirements so that we can build muscle.
Yep.
And I'm sure it's been said before on this podcast and elsewhere, but as we are aging, like by weight, I like to include the skeletal system. I like the musculoskeletal system by weight. Your bones, essentially, your ligaments, your tendons, and your muscles are the largest by volume and weight in the body. And so if we can optimize for the musculoskeletal system, then we can think about, instead of being skinny at 70, which, if you're just concerned about aesthetics, like newsflash, being skinny when you're 70 is not a really great look. You're going to look pretty frail. But if you have muscle to fill, right, to fill the skin, that is if we're just talking aesthetics, it's a better look. But if we're talking from the point of mobility, metabolic function, optimizing even our own endogenous production of hormones, because yes, in the menopause transition, our reproductive hormones fall off a cliff. We lose our estrogen, as you very well know, progesterone and testosterone, but you can also be dosing those. You can also be endogenously producing those. Every time that you're weight training, you will have a lift in your testosterone and your estrogen production. Those are anabolic hormones, and they're required. Actually, the more muscle you have, the more we need those in circulation. So yeah, a couple things from the sort of social, like the psychosocial, as you've been talking about, but also from a physiological perspective as well. As you are tapping into that feminine energy of always wanting more, I would invite you to think about, how can I also think about more muscle, more tissue, more bone density, more organ density? Like, how can we also want more of those things as well and not lose them?
Exactly. So this brings to mind the conversation of wanting to feel lighter on the scale, which is another holdover from our misguided youth. I have this fantasy, I'm sure you do too, where we go to the doctor for our annual checkup and they make us get in a DEXA machine instead of on the scale. And they say,
or they just do a waist to hip measurement. And like, you're 0.8, fantastic. We don't care what you weigh. It's just the ratio of how you look is important. Yeah. Or the ratio in terms of visceral fat that you're taking is more important than the weight on the scale. Yeah.
Yeah. Or imagine the doctor saying, "Oh, Sally, you've lost 2 pounds of muscle mass and lean body mass since we last saw you. So I'm going to need you to put that back on." Like, just completely changing the paradigm, like parallel universe.
Yeah.
I had never heard that. You actually just taught me something I've never heard before, and I'm so excited. The endogenous production of estrogen and testosterone makes sense to me, but estrogen during strength training. Can you say more about that? How does that?
Yeah, sure. The way that women and men actually build muscle is interesting. I mean, again, we're not little men. We actually build muscle a little differently. So men, as we know, 10 to 20 usually times more testosterone than women have. And so women rely on the testosterone that we do have, which is, again, 10 to 20 times less. But estrogen and other growth factors are part of the way that we actually create that anabolic environment for muscle to grow. So when we are weight training, we are going to naturally pulse things like insulin, like growth factor, IGF-1, which is a growth factor that helps to stimulate bone and muscle growth. And for women, one of the ways that we're actually, maybe I'll say, and we're always comparing ourselves to men. Oh, we have less testosterone, we have less. But with IGF-1, this is actually, we can actually reach peak release of IGF-1 much faster than men. So we typically will reach it at about 20 to 30 minutes of, moderate or high intense activity. Whereas with men, it takes about double that. So it's something like 40 to 60 minutes in order to reach that growth of that, or peak of that growth factor, I should say. So women use estrogen and growth factors to make up for the lack of testosterone that we have in order to grow muscle. So we still grow muscle, but we're using slightly different pathways to do so. And so when you are lifting weights, usually for testosterone, depending on how fit the person is, you'll have a rise of something. Like, the fitter you are, the shorter the rise. Unfortunately, that's just what happens. But you'll have, as you're after a lift session, anywhere from, if you're super fit, something like 12 hours versus all the way up to like 48 hours, you'll have sort of a rise in testosterone. And the same is true for estrogen as well. So as we are increasing these anabolic hormones, as when we're training, you can sort of, in a way, like self-dose, like you can go into your own internal pharmacy, right? And give yourself the hormone therapy. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't take hormone replacement therapy. That's not, I'm a big fan of it. When it's indicated for me, I will absolutely be on it as well. But you can also activate your own internal pharmacy of hormone production through, mechanical tension, through lifting weights.
Fascinating. And this is a very personal question, you're not yet on hormone therapy. And you said when it's indicated for you, so that's based on symptoms. That's what takes us to the doctor to get the hormones addressed.
Yeah, I do labs about twice a year. And then I also, for hormone replacement therapy, I think it's also important not to really be super fixated on labs, because especially as a woman in perimenopause, she is very much a moving target. Like some months she's high, some months she's low. So I'm also watching for clinical symptoms. And for a lot of women in perimenopause, you'll find that progesterone is the first thing that that a woman will start taking. And then, because estrogen is a little bit funny, like I said, some months you produce a lot of it and some months you don't. So you're sort of on this wild roller coaster until menopause. So a lot of practitioners will play with estrogen, but it is easier in some ways. It's easier to be in menopause because you're just like, you're constant, like you have no, your production of estrogen is relatively constant. Yeah. But for me, it'll probably, like, I'm watching my progesterone now. Like my progesterone's, it's getting to the point where I'm like, all right, as soon as I see any deficit in sleep, if I'm starting to notice anxiety, if I'm raging more, if I'm feeling like I just don't have the capacity to deal with the regular demands of my life, that will be my first option.
I love that. Yeah, I cannot wait to be through it. I'm looking forward to it. I see these 54-year-old queens on Instagram that are like, I'm thriving. It's like, I cannot wait for that. But for now, we're just holding on the saddle bronc of menopause, perimenopause. Okay, follow-up questions on that. So a couple that I want to think about. First of all, let me know if this is even in the realm of something that you are interested in talking about. But we want women to eat more protein. And with animal protein comes cholesterol, and women are concerned about cholesterol. And cholesterol maybe becomes a little bit chaotic during the menopause transition too. However, cholesterol is also crucial for manufacturing hormones. Yep. Right. So, do you think this is just a hunch I have, and I'd love for you to speak on it? Like the women have been eating insanely low amounts of animal protein for too long. Like it's 4 ounces of chicken on a salad for lunch, and that's it sometimes, or a collagen coffee. We're chronically low on animal protein, chronically low on cholesterol. Do you think this is having an effect on our hormone levels, or is it not a factor?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think the average American woman eats something like 40 to 60 grams of protein a day, which is which I think is in line with the RDA. I think it's in line with the recommended daily allowance. However, again, it's like, what do we want to eat to survive versus thrive? Like, I'm not here just to survive, right? So I think a general rule, I eat animal proteins every day. I generally like to have about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. I'm a little higher than that. So I'm about $1. It depends on where I am in my cycle, but somewhere between $1.35 and $1.40, let's say. So 135 to 140 pounds. I probably consume 160-ish, 170-ish grams of protein. Yeah.
Amazing.
Animal and otherwise. So I used to be, actually, this is where something that I've actually changed my mind on. It used to be like, no, animal proteins, they're the most bioavailable. They're the, like they're the most, protein, like they have the full constitution of the amino acids. And I think that what we're sort of seeing in the literature now is that, yes, animal proteins do have an advantage in terms of bioavailability over plant proteins. They're slightly less bioavailable, but you can still get pretty damn close with plant proteins as well. So a lot of vegan and vegetarian bodybuilders who look fantastic. And even if you don't have desire to become a bodybuilder. I think we can learn a lot from the bodybuilding community because they really do manipulate food. It's a science in that community. So you don't have to be, you don't have to have any aspirations to be a bodybuilder, but I just like to derive like lessons that we can take from physique competitors. So animal or plant proteins are going to get you there. I think low cholesterol has been linked to degenerative deficits in terms of cognitive, like, subjective or moderate cognitive impairment. So we do need sort of a base level of cholesterol. A lot of women do, without changing much in their diet in that perimenopausal transition, will start to see cholesterol creeping up. I think what is more important than looking at, because what will happen is they'll go to their doctor and their doctor will just sort of read across the line. They'll say, okay, 250. Oh, there's an H there for high. Okay, your cholesterol's high. Yeah. So they won't actually look at what their HDL is, what their LDL is. Are they looking at an LDL particle number? Are they looking at ApoB, except so they don't look at the entire picture. That's the first thing. And I would say the second thing is, again, coming back to muscle. What we often find is that there is a propensity for a change in the way that we are metabolizing food as we age. So we become more insulin resistant, meaning that as we age, the amount of insulin that we tend to output from the pancreas increases because our bodies are less efficient at pulling the glucose out from the plasma, from the blood circulation. So we start to see increase more and more and more insulin as an attempt to drive the glucose into the cells, right? So this can also contribute to this cholesterol number. So if you are starting now to accumulate, if you are starting to have a higher output from the liver, let's say, of some of these, you have a higher glucose output and therefore now you have higher insulin. And now we don't know what to do with all of this. We don't know what to do with all this excess glucose. We start making actually fatty liver, right? So we start storing it as fat and it starts to kind of accumulate in the viscera on top of the organs or the viscera. This is what drives up. This is essentially what drives up our cholesterol level. So again, the contraction of our muscles, one of the beautiful things about the muscles is that they can take up glucose in an insulin dependent and independent manner. So whether insulin is present or not. So the more you can activate this contractile tissue, the better you're going to be able to control that insulin output, let's say, because your muscles can start to sop up the excess glucose that's in the system. And then therefore, that will have a knock-on effect to your lipids, right? So all that to say, eat animal protein, eat your plant protein, and lift, because that is going to probably be the two biggest things that you can do, consuming proteins, whether they're animal or plant-based sources, as well as stimulating that contractile tissue, your muscles, to control some of the labs that we see go wonky in perimenopause and menopause.
Hey, it's Erin, co-host of Health Coach Radio. I've trained men and women of all different body types and skill levels, and take it from me, women are made for strength. They may just have a different way of getting there than men do. With the Primal Health Coach Institute's Strength Training for Women Specialist certification, you'll be able to address the needs, challenges, questions, and goals most relevant to women. You'll learn how to design a training program, and then you'll develop one. You'll also learn how to co-create individual eating strategies for clients and how to navigate potentially sensitive topics like menopause, reproductive cycles, hormone-related dysfunction, and diet culture. If you want to empower women to become fitter and stronger, then visit primalhealthcoach.com and learn more about our specialization in strength training for women. I love that. That was an awesome sort of jaunt through the mechanism of action of all this stuff. Yeah. Which I think is useful for health coaches to know. So when their clients come to them and say, my doctor says I'm pre-diabetic and my cholesterol is too high, and so should I eat low carb? Should I eat low fat? They're really compartmentalizing detrimentally the different sort of biochemical silos, I guess, but it is all intertwined, right? So here's why we need to eat animal protein. Here's why we need to lift weights and take walks to manage our blood to glucose response, what have you, because it's all kind of, there's just this sort of inherent, quote unquote, breakdown of the whole metabolic system, just a slowing, or not slowing, I hate that word, changing of it as we age. But it's all resolvable if we can put together the actions that kind of resolve the big picture metabolic dysregulation that's happening. It's interesting. It's cool
Yeah,
to
and
think about it. All
there was also a study, I'll find it for you, you can put it in the show notes. I think that they looked at the metabolic rate. I forget
Yes.
if it was
6,400
R.
people. Yeah.
Yes, yes. It's like from 20 years old all the
95
way
years
up
old.
to,
Yep.
yes.
Mhm.
And there was no change in metabolic rate between 20 and 60. They did start to see a stepwise decrease after 60. So for if you're a woman or man in, you're 45, 55, there's not a really big change that's happening in your metabolism, but you can look at what's happening in your lifestyle.
Yes.
What tends to happen is we tend to be more sedentary. We tend to sit at the end of the night. Instead of going for a walk, let's say after dinner or whatever, what have you. So there is this sort of creeping, the propensity to move less
Yes.
increases as we age. So I think that that's like a little sneaky thing as well, which is why looking at steps is actually really important.
Mhm.
Not the 10, you don't need to get 10,000, whatever. I don't, but you need to be moving somewhere between 7 and 8,000 steps a day. That seems to be the magic number that
Okay.
that reduces like all-cause mortality and all of those things. So I would say yes, our metabolism stays relatively unchanged over the course of our lives. And then, of course, 60, 65, 70, we do start to see some decline, but it's
Yeah.
not that
It's
much.
tiny.
It's
It's
yeah,
tiny.
it's not like, oh, it drops off 10%. It's like, okay, you get like a couple percents, you get knocked off.
0.7%
Yeah.
is what that
Yeah.
research study said. Insane.
Okay.
But I think you're
Yeah.
right. So I think that there's, in a manner of speaking, it's a coincidence. Hear me out. I'm going to flesh this out. So women get to midlife, they feel like their metabolism is slowing down, which it's not. It objectively is not. But they're under-muscled and they're sort of behaving in ways through food and lifestyle and exercise that are sort of encouraging the dysregulation of their already kind of dysregulated metabolic function.
Yeah.
And, also menopause symptoms are interesting because, like, for example, one of my big menopause symptoms, perimenopause symptoms, was low mood and body pain. So you think I want to go to the gym when I'm feeling down and my toes hurt? Like, no,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's it's so many, what's interesting about this is there's so many moving parts. I think health coaches are able to put these pieces together for people and help them advocate for themselves in different, like, go get the trainer, go get your hormone therapy. We'll talk about food. Maybe you have a dietitian or whatever you're working with. I think it's crucial for the female health consumer of a certain, or any age, any era, as far as I'm concerned, to fully understand the totality of how their body works. And we have the opportunity to help folks seek to understand, if they want to, how that all works.
Yeah. 100%.
So to circle back on plant protein really quick, I heard this on a podcast this week, and it made me question my own bias, which my own bias is toward animal protein and away from plant protein.
Yeah.
But the am I going to screw this word? Estrogenic?
Estrogenic. Yep.
Estrogenic properties of soy, which previously were sort of touted as a downside, might actually be beneficial as
For
estrogen
women,
starts
yeah.
to fly the coop. Is that a thing?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a phytoestrogen. So it mimics, so it can bind into the estrogen receptor and weakly activate it. So, which is really lovely if you're losing your estrogen. The other thing that I'll just mention with plant proteins, so my bias used to be like, oh, it's not a complete, like you really need to do your jurisprudence in order to like get the complete set of amino acids if you're vegetarian. Now that doesn't change, but in terms of efficaciousness in the gym, my bias used to be animal proteins every day and all day. Like that's really where you're going to get all your gains from because it's more bioavailable and all the amino acids, et cetera. But we actually don't see that in the literature. So and I'll send you a couple studies just to, if there's any nerds listening, I'm sure that there are a few of them. It's like nerd namaste. I'll send you all the links if you want. But no change in muscle mass. So they had looked at, it had a couple different arms of the study. One was given eukiloric, so across both arms of the study, same calories. One was given animal proteins like a whey. Another was given plant proteins like a soy, let's say. And then over the course of the studies, no change in strength gains, no change in their ability to put on muscle mass. So it seems that when we're talking about hypertrophy, the most important thing is that you're stimulating the tissue, which means you got to get to the gym. That's sort of like, you can't just eat your way to more muscle mass, which I actually think people misunderstand because the conversation around protein has become so, I don't know exactly the word, but the conversation around proteins, like you need to give up your job in order to
Yeah.
make sure that you're getting enough protein in a day. And that is going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And therefore, if you get MPS, then you're golden. It's like, but MPS is, you have to physically stimulate. There has to be mechanical tension. You have to there has to be a load that you're moving, and then you can supplement the fitness or the mechanical tension, let's say, with the protein. And it actually doesn't matter what kind of protein. So that's where I've softened my view on protein. So I used to have a lot of clients just from Asian backgrounds, Southeast Asian backgrounds. It's like, being vegetarian is very, very common. Like cows are sacred, right? They're like, I'm never going to have a burger. Like, it's just, I can't ethically, can't get over that. And I used to be like, well, you're just not going to, when I was a very dumb doctor, it's like, you're just going to have to, like
Suck it up.
yeah, like, but yeah, suck it up, buttercup. And so for people who are vegetarian and vegan, like the great news here is that you can get very close to the results of someone who's consuming whey protein. Let's say if you're having soy protein or pea, whatever protein, whatever it is, you're going to get very close to, and then all the whole foods like the tempeh, the tofu, the edamame, all the things, very close to someone who's consuming animal products every day in terms of muscle mass, which is really important for women, and strength.
Amazing. That's great because, again, psychosocial aspects of women in this era, just generally having a low appetite or a strange relationship with meat. I've had my clients say, I just feel weird about eating this much meat. I know, Erin, you've explained to me all the great reasons why, but I just feel weird about it. Now, I have to take that at face value. You feel weird about it, then I can't force you to eat meat if it's feeling weird. So it's good to know that we can say to our clients, "Oh, no problem. Go have a meatless Monday. It's fine. It's absolutely, completely fine for what we're trying to achieve here."
I also think that appetite is really interesting with women because they have probably for a long time been eating under what they should. Appetite is often a really good signal for a healthy or not healthy metabolism. Like
Exactly.
You
Oh
probably
my gosh.
should, right? Like you should be hungry in the morning. You haven't eaten for 8, 9, 10 hours, depending on how long you slept and your last meal. You should, like, appetite for women often is a little bit of it's tricky because they're often not hungry, which is usually a sign of poor metabolic health.
Mm-hmm.
And then because they have eaten so little for so long,
They're used
they
to being
actually
hungry.
don't know. Right. And kind of back to what we were talking about at the top of the hour, like that feminine energy to sort of just want more, like that devouring, like I am insatiable. I want more, I want more, I want more. That doesn't necessarily, like, I think that there's a lot of people who are petrified of that when it comes to appetite. Like, oh, I'm still hungry. It's like, yes, you're still hungry.
Oh my gosh.
Feed yourself. Yeah.
Now you've opened up my can of worms because this is the whole premise behind my women's weight loss program, but I'm not going to spend time with. But the thing is that I hear from women all the time because as I mentioned earlier, I try to get them to have robust meals, and one of them is breakfast. I want you to have a protein dominant meal at breakfast, mainly just to get it done, quite frankly, because the day's going to get away from you. Let's just front load that protein up in the front part of the day. And women will say to me, well, I'm not really much of a breakfast eater. I'm not hungry in the morning. And in my head, I'm like, well, you should be. You should. And I've said verbatim what you said, a healthy appetite's a sign of a healthy metabolism. Well, so one of the things I've done is I've, in a manner of speaking, tongue in cheek, forbidden my clients from eating yogurt. Because hear me out. Because yogurt is such a female breakfast. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I want you to have steak and eggs. Like, do you know what I mean? It's just small, it's light, it's creamy, it's not to me, it's not robust. It's a great side dish. But
you need a T-bone. You need a T-bone.
Yes.
This is like a feminine. You're gonna have a big steak for breakfast.
Yeah. But whenever a woman, not whenever, oftentimes when I'm getting women to eat to their full point of satiety, they will say to me with great honesty, I feel fat. This is the word they use. I ate that big breakfast. Now I feel fat. It's like, okay, that's fascinating because you didn't get fat since breakfast. That just biologically didn't happen. What you're feeling is satiety. And you've probably not felt that since you were maybe a toddler. I don't know, a child.
Right.
When was the last time a woman ate to satiety? And my rally cry is, adult women are the only creatures on planet Earth that don't eat to satiety when they're hungry. Everybody else does. Your dog does. Your toddler does. Your husband does. Just us. We're just not allowed to. We never have done it. So it's really unpracticed for us to feel that.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I was thinking about when you were saying that. First, I think that as a woman, especially in midlife, you are in a race against time to preserve your muscle, your bone, tendons, ligaments, brain, organ, all the things. And time will steal that from you if you are not smart and strategic about it. And there's still like a certain level of inevitable decline. Like you can do all the things right and you're still not going to be as jacked when you're 85 as you are maybe now when you're 45. So the first thing that I would invite any woman who feels like she wants to have a little bird breakfast with seeds and yogurt, let's say, is consider that you have been like you are now in a postprandial catabolic state because you have been sleeping, right? So 8 hours, your body has worked through whatever the last meal is that you had. And in order to survive, your body will break down your muscles to derive the amino acid reservoir for your brain. And so you really have to think about the first meal of your day, which should be in the morning.
Yes.
To break that catabolic state so that you actually move from catabolism to anabolism, right? So you're moving from breakdown to growth. So you're giving your body, I know everybody talks about 30 grams of protein. I would say minimum of 50. That's sort of my number. I like 50 grams of protein in the morning. Like, it's like eggs.
Can't wait to make my
eggs.
clients listen to this.
Yeah. So eggs and, all the things, right? So whatever that looks, it could be eggs, you could have, I love to have eggs and bacon and avocado. That's sort of like my favorite, and a big piece of sourdough toast. But you really need to think about breaking that because and even if you're someone who loves to fast, you can still fast, but you can change the fasting window. Like you should be breaking your fast first thing in the morning, even though I'm not a huge fan of fasting for women in midlife. But if you are and you love it, that's fine. Think about having a phasic shift of your fasting to eating earlier in the day and stopping, 2, 3, 4 hours before you go to sleep. That's fine. But it's that first meal of the day. And the earlier you can have it, the better you are. So you're not sacrificing. Like if you're going to the gym and then you're fasting until 12, like, girl, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Eat in the morning. And the other thing I'll say with food is, now I like to train in the morning. I typically train earlier in the morning, and not always, like depending on the day, because my kids have soccer practice early some days, so depending on the day, I don't always get to eat prior to my training, but I will have like a protein shake or something like that I'm sipping intra-workout. The weekend, I always have a bit more flexibility. So I always make sure that I'm fed before I train. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that those workouts are categorically different in terms of my endurance, my performance in the gym, my ability to push myself further to a PR or personal record or personal best than the ones that I do during the week. Now, I still work as close as I can to failure and do all the sort of, working on tempo and technique and all that stuff. However, my performance in the gym is noticeably augmented when I'm fed. So I would also say that if you're someone who's like, I really want to make sure that the time that I'm spending in the gym is worthwhile, like you have to feed yourself. You have to feed yourself.
Yes. This idea of like circadian rhythms is something that I really geek out on, in sort of shifting the feeding to what I call the awake half of the day. There's awake stuff and there's asleep stuff, and the food stuff should happen more in the awake time of day. This is literally how I simplify the language for my clients. You mentioned it's a race against time on the loss of lean body mass. And I actually refer to it as like walking up a down escalator. Like you basically have to just stay in the same spot, right? Just keep walking up. You're not going to maybe make gains per se, although I have big goals. I'm going to be the next Train with Joan. You just wait. When I'm 80, I'm going to be, I can see it now. But it is this idea, like to some extent, I mean, sarcopenia, apparently this starts after our 30th birthday. We start losing our lean body mass after age 30, and it just kind of falls off a cliff. So we are kind of just working to preserve it, but it's work. The way I've reframed it for my misguided, starved youth is this is actually way more fun work than the work of starving and doing cardio and eating salads with dressing on the side and rice cakes and Diet Coke. This is way more fun to be nourished robustly and feel good, but it just is a paradigm shift that female clients I think of our era will have a hard time with, and so the health coach can help them this is such an opportunity for health coaches because what are we? We help people execute the behavior changes that they're hearing about on podcasts or hearing from their doctor to support their body through menopause and all the stages of life. And our role as health coaches is to help them execute the bare minimums that they can manage successfully in their lives and get them into the realm of executing these things with some consistency. So this is great for us to talk about. Really great.
Yeah. And the simpler it is, the more likely they'll be able to stick with it long term. So if you're a coach, don't make it too complicated. It's like squat and repeat. It's
Exactly.
like just
yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'm working on a strength training program for my clients because they asked me to, and I don't want to build one because I'm a nutritionist. I'm a personal trainer as well, but I don't necessarily play in that space. But it's like, okay, I'm going to give you 2 exercises every day, like 2 completely unrelated, like a deadlift and a overhead press, like a squat and a row. 2 random things. Just go in and do those as heavy as you can. I actually do want to talk about that because you touched on that earlier. There's the narrative around women lifting heavy. I'm hearing there's some now arguing. There's just so much arguing on the internet, isn't there? Women should lift heavy. Women, especially menopause, should lift heavy. And then your perspective, and I think this is really important, is unless they don't have the tissue tolerance or the body awareness or the mind-muscle connection to lift heavy, then they probably shouldn't. So your perspective is we can play with resistance in terms of tempo, range of motion, rep scheme, that kind of thing. But do you
Volume.
believe all
Yeah.
women should lift heavy?
Well, heavy is a relative term, right?
True.
So for me, I would say this is how I would define heavy. First and foremost, your body weight can be heavy. Your technique is king. Like there's nothing more important than your technique. You must be able to execute whatever movement pattern you're doing, squat, lunge, overhead press, push up, pull up, whatever. The technique must be dialed in. And if that means that it's not heavy, it doesn't feel heavy right now, but you have problems with your ankle mobility, let's say, or your hip mobility or thoracic extent, whatever the issue is, work on that first, because I promise you, my practice used to be right beside a CrossFit, and no hate to CrossFit, but it was very good for business, right? Because it's like they always want to know like how many you can do and like how many you can do in a minute, right? It's like, so they sacrifice technique for reps. I mean, I'm sure that I don't know if they've changed. I don't know if they've changed their philosophy now, but I was like, I couldn't even predict how brilliant I was opening up right next to a CrossFit. So there's like always people coming in. It's like, oh, I was doing this WOD yesterday. Okay, anyway. So prioritize your technique, master the technique. And once you do, you will know that especially if you are a gym girly, if you're going to the gym, no, most people in the gym are not doing that. They're prioritizing weights, they're ego lifting, and it is a surefire way, if you don't have the tissue tolerance, that you will injure yourself. And especially like muscle injuries are annoying, right? So sprains are super annoying. Strains are super annoying. But if you damage the holding elements, the ligaments and the tendons, like those take, even if you're 25, they take forever to heal because the blood flow supply is different, etc. So I would say master the technique first and then overlay on top of that, because that is a form of progressive if you are able to improve your ankle mobility so that you are able to squat properly, that is a wonderful way to progress. And then you can put the 2.5 pound or whatever you're put, like you just a little bit more next week and a little bit more next week and a little bit more next week. So I would say, yes, as heavy as you can in a range of motion that you can own that is full and pain-free.
Yes.
That's the other thing is like any exercise, you should never feel pain in the joints. Never, never, never. There's not one weightlifting exercise where you should feel it in your joints. There's none.
Right.
If you're feeling it in your joints, you need to change your technique. You need someone to watch you. You need to film yourself. You need to get somebody to critique you to help you. You need to figure out where the imbalances are in the kinetic chain because there's a break somewhere and you need to figure that out. So yeah, you should only ever feel it in the muscle. If you feel achy, like sometimes, like a chest press, like sometimes people find like a wide grip pull up. Some people get like their shoulder gets a little bit weird, or, you know, if you have a camembert chest press bar, sometimes like there's too much of a big stretch on the shoulder, that kind of thing. Then you have to modify the exercise. Yeah. Pain is just a request for something different. Yeah. So if you feel pain, honor the request that your body's giving you to change the way you're doing it.
That's very good advice for all the fitness trainers listening.
Yeah.
I think about one exercise I see women doing a lot in the gym that I wish they would do better, in air quotes, is overhead press. Women will kind of do these partial range overhead press, and if maybe ask them, to help or whatever. In this particular case, I'm teaching the class, so I'm allowed to go up to them and say, "Hey, could we do this a little better?" Otherwise, I would never approach somebody and try to critique their technique if it
This is
wasn't my job.
a standing overhead
Standing
press
overhead
or
press.
seated? Standing. Okay.
Standing,
Okay.
and they're
Mhm.
just struggling to kind of get full extension overhead, and they'll say, "Well, I can't because it bothers my shoulders." And in my head, I'm thinking, "I think your shoulders are bothered because you've not, executed a full overhead press." But that's, there's it's a delicate balance there. Do you have any thoughts on something like that? Women who have sort of a decreased range of motion, maybe from not having tapped the range of motion, and how to move them past that.
I would say find ways to add stability. So
Mhm.
that's why I clarified whether it's a seated or standing. So when you're standing, there is less stability, right? So now they have to engage their core, they have to make sure there's no rib flare, and they have to be able to brace in order to lift it up overhead. And then you have to look at their grip, et cetera, right? So the grip might be too tight, might be too wide. So I would say that if there is something that is causing you pain, find a way to add stability to it, because the more unstable a movement is, the higher, well, I'll say you're less able to actually recruit muscle fibers, because your
Mhm.
body will always prioritize stability because your
Stability,
body
yeah.
doesn't want you to fall, right? So find stability. You'll be able to recruit more of the muscle fibers, and you may also find that you're going to be able to increase your range of motion. And then the other thing is drop the weight. Like, leave the ego at the door of the gym. Like, if it is too heavy for you to do a full range of motion, just do a lighter weight until
Oh, yeah.
you can add on. I mean, that's always an option, right? Full range of motion is very important for women. At the shoulder joint, I would say, especially, I'd also say at the hip, those are the
Yeah.
two joints where I would see the most problems with women. So maybe many women have heard of like frozen shoulder. Certainly, I would see that a ton. I would also see a lot of hip bursitis and very, very poor external rotation and internal rotation of the hip.
Yeah.
So these are like things like fire hydrants, that kind of thing. Like if you're on all fours, let's say you're lifting the leg out to the side, the knees bent at about a 90-degree angle. So I would say always find like more stable positions. So maybe instead of on all fours, maybe you get on your side and you do a clam, right? So you're still working external rotation of the hip, or maybe it's a band. You can put a band around it if you want a bit more resistance. But now you're not relying also on the core to provide that stability. That's an example. The standing versus the seated overhead press might be an option. And then it's always like you can always drop the weight until it feels really great and you have that full ROM, and then you can add on weight.
And I think the seated version would take out a bit of the central nervous system piece too, which I think is taxed quite often. One thing on the hips, though, I was hearing that one of the other sort of dysfunctions of hip mobility is hip flexion. We lose the ability to actual hip. No, not
Yes.
sorry, hip extension. My bad, hip extension.
Well, both, but yes, tell me about the
Yeah.
extension, then I'll color it in
So
for
the
you. Yep.
idea with hip extension is if we lose the ability to extend our leg, behind us, now we're kind of in this anterior sort of lean of sorts, and this is sort of the falling risk, and being able to take a big step to catch yourself when you're falling. So I've got a trainer that I work with who's working on my sort of longevity pain-free movement, and they're getting me to do mostly like knees over toes lunge split squats because I need to get that extension. Like, you got to preserve hip extension. That's one of the things that is sort of being implicated in falls, is that loss of extension.
Yeah. So one of the things, so extension, when we're thinking about hip extension, we are thinking about glute activation, which is, for most of us, we are often sitting on our butts, on our assets, right? So we are sitting on our glutes, and then they become sort of long and weak. So I think glute training is super important for women. There's also as your glutes are, let's say the stronger your glutes are, there's also a direct connection with your cognition and I would say legs in general. But for
Really?
fall risk, yeah. So so our glutes actually, they do so much in the body. I mean, this is an entirely separate podcast, but they literally connect the upper. I am in love with glutes, I just have to say. So I mean, I would always, as a chiropractor, anyone that came into my practice with back pain, I would test their glutes, because
Yeah.
more often than not, it was either bilateral glutes or unilateral glute weakness. So there's a orthopedic test called Trendelenburg. Like you just basically get someone to stand on one foot is elevated, and you're looking for a hip drop, which is usually an indication of like nerve weakness, like insufficient nerve it's not getting to the glute to activate it properly, the nerve. So glutes are super important. Fall risk is actually hip flexion. So it's both of them. So when you're thinking about falling, especially falling forward, if you think about an elderly woman, maybe she trips on stairs or a corner of a carpet or icy patch on the road, whatever. She has to be able to have the speed in her psoas, in her hip flexors to catch her, right? So to prevent falls, one of the things that we want to think about for women as we're aging is hip flexor speed and power. So we want to think about core. That's super important. And that includes the pelvic floor, ladies. And actually, if I can just talk for a moment about this, this is like I had Dr. Sarah Rudin on my podcast. She's a pelvic floor physical therapist, and we were talking about, we've been talking about osteoporosis and, sarcopenia on this, we've been talking about bone health and muscle health, you and I, on this show. What often doesn't get talked about is urinary incontinence. And this is the number one reason why women are admitted to a nursing home, is that they are either urge incontinent, stress incontinent, and that progresses to fecal incontinence. And no one wants to talk about this because it's cloaked in shame. Like no one wants to say, when I jump, I'm peeing myself. But your core, which what I was saying, and I sort of went on this tangent with the pelvic floor, your core also, like the top of it obviously is the diaphragm. We have anteriorly the rectus abdominis, and then caudally. So at the bottom we have the sling, which is the pelvic floor. So the core is super important for longevity. Hip flexor speed is also super important. And then your back extensors, right? So these are like the extensors up, that's the back of the core, let's say. Mm-hmm. And that's the only thing that you kind of have really supporting the spine as well. So if you think about the rib cage sort of locks the thoracic spine in place, like it kind of stabilizes. We don't often get a lot of thoracic, like mid-back injuries. Right. We get a lot of low back injuries, right? And that's because there's a weakened core. The glutes are part of that. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I think for women, when we're thinking about how can we help them age powerfully, part of that is hip flexor speed and strength, because you want to be able to get your foot in front of you because your center of mass is moving forward as you're falling.
Yes.
You need to get your foot forward ahead of you before you fall, and to be able to break that fall, because you don't want to break a hip, because there's a whole... we can get into that as well. Yeah, depressing stats with hip fractures, cognitive decline, death, all the things.
Yeah.
So,
Incredible. We've covered a lot of ground. I actually do have one more question for you, just a quick one, I think. Probably not, though, because I do want to make sure we circle back to this.
Yes.
Women coming through the menopause transition, which we both are, and many are. Here we are. We're doing it. We're doing the thing. We're figuring it out for the generations after us. Don't worry. We got you. Gen X has got you. Millennials.
Yeah.
So if a health coach is working with somebody who's coming into their menopause transition, or, thinking about preparing for hormone therapy, that kind of thing, do you have any quick sort of advocacy advice that a health coach should give their client? When the client says, I need to look into hormone therapy, what should I do? My OBGYN doesn't seem open to giving me estrogen or testosterone. What can it? Do you have any quick advice in terms of client advocacy for hormone therapy?
Oh, gosh. I mean, the one thing that sort of popped in my head is find another doctor. But you at least as a woman have you may or may not be a candidate for hormone therapy. There are contraindications to it for sure, but you at least should be granted the civility of having the conversation. Yeah. So depending on the country that you're in, I think the States is a little bit easier in terms of getting a second opinion. I think if you are someone in the UK or in Canada where there's more of a national health program, doctors are overworked and underpaid and full of patients, so it becomes harder. So I would be looking into more telehealth options, maybe for countries where there's more of a national health program and your doctor is I hear all the time from my European women who listen to my podcast, they're we are not talking about this in Portugal. It's we are not talking about this in my country. The doctors are not even willing. So I would say where there's cultural resistance and or it's difficult because of the system that you're in, I would be seeking out telehealth options as well.
Great. Yeah, I think that's good advice. So that for the health coach, it's sort of, the conversation we can have with their client is, tell me about your relationship with your doctor. Are they listening to you? Do you want me to help you find another doctor? We can do that. We can Google a doctor in your city, or we can find a telehealth option. We know our opportunity is to have, again, this in the advocacy space. We're not telling our clients what to do. We're not ordering blood tests or urine tests. We're not doing Dutch tests, health coaches.
Sure.
But helping the client advocate, having the conversation and seeking out those resources is really in our purview. So,
And even if your client just feels supported by having you say that
yes.
too, because I think for women, we tend to be higher in a personality trait called agreeableness, right?
Mhm.
So if you have a doctor that's like, no, you don't need that, it's more difficult for a woman to be like, really? Why do you
Yeah,
think that? Or
exactly.
versus like, oh, okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Sorry to bother you. So I think even just giving your client the feeling like you've got her, it's like, no, that's not okay. Like,
Right.
let me help you. Like, that doesn't seem right. I think that will also embolden her a little bit and help her advocate for herself. Because at the end of the day, she does have to advocate for herself, but it's
She does.
going to feel better knowing that she has someone in her corner that's helping her find resources, etc.
Incredible. Really great. Oh my goodness. Well, this was such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you lending your perspective on everything we covered, which was a lot. Tons of useful stuff for health and useful stuff for health coaches to use
That was
with
a
their.
greand Freudian slip. Yeah.
That was pretty good. So, Dr. Estima, you're all over the map. You're everywhere. You're online. You're in person. Where can people follow you and just lean into more of your stuff?
Sure. I'd love to invite you to listen to my podcast, Better with Dr. Stephanie. Just if you're a podcast listener here, you could just pop on over to my podcast. We have weekly episodes from scientists and like top world thinkers on what it means to live lived life as a woman. And probably the main place other than that is my website. So drstephaniestima.com, and you'll find like the Instagram, we got newsletters, we got all fun, all the fun things where you can interact with me for free. And of course there's books and all that stuff there. So drstephaniestima.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and all your wisdom. It was a true joy.
It was a pleasure. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast was brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute. To learn more about how to become a successful health coach, get in touch with us by visiting primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or if you're already a successful health coach, practitioner, influencer, or thought leader with a thriving business and an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at hello@primalhealthcoach.com and let us know why we need to interview you for Health Coach Radio. Thanks for listening.